Hey guys, welcome back to Spy Plays. It's been a while, but trust me, this deck tech was worth the wait. This is a favorite of ours and a passion project that has been in the works for a couple months. Welcome to the Tevesh Rakdos Turbo Stax deck tech. We'll go over the playstyle, strategy, and card selection in this video. You will question everything you know about cEDH, build at your own risk, and viewer discretion is advised. Hey, welcome guys to our primer on Tevesh. This deck list is named Zero Game Objects, and I have my co-host here, Garrett.
What's up?
And my co-host, John.
Howdy, what's going on, gamers?
So, yeah, we're just going to get into what type of deck is this, and why would you want to play this deck?
Alright, can I kick us off, Garrett?
Yeah, good.
Yeah, well, this is, as we like to call it, a Turbo Stax deck. That terminology might be kind of confusing as you're like, Turbo Stax? What do you mean? Is it a Stax deck? Is it a Turbo deck? Well, and what we mean by that, by calling it that, is that this deck is trying to utilize the red-black acceleration suite to accelerate us into our interactive hate permanents extremely fast. And while we don't have the best, we don't have like classic stuff like Rule of Law, as we're not running white, we're able to use this mana to accelerate into these more expensive cards that are really just backbreaking for opponents to deal with.
Cool. Yeah, so why would you want to play this deck, I guess, over other decks in similar colors, I guess?
So this deck is especially potent, like John was saying, at in the first, I would say 1 to 2 turns of the game, where like even with cEDH decks being at the power level that they are on those first couple turns, they're oftentimes not able to keep up with something that's extremely taxing, like a turn 1 Trinisphere and stuff like that.
Right.
So
Yeah.
they can't really play the game, and their game plan kind of falls apart after that kind of stuff happens, where suddenly their hand of Soul Ring and a Talisman becomes like almost completely like skip the first 3 turns of the game, right?
Yeah.
Right.
And I know turn 1 Trinisphere kind of sounds like a pipe dream for these kinds of decks, right? Where you're able to get out this thing that's like, oh my god, that's a crazy turn 1. But this deck it has a very good balanced ratio of rituals and mana acceleration
And
to
payoffs.
like what we refer to, payoffs or bombs or whatever you want to call it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So these like turn 1 Trinisphere plays. Trinisphere is sure one out of many of the things, and probably one of the better ones to play on turn 1, but definitely not the only one.
Yeah, and one of the cool things about ROG, and one of the cool things about this deck, is we actually optimize our amount of Stax payoffs by playing the Polymorph effects. And so we're able to polymorph into Sire of Insanity or Void Winnower.
Let me pull this up.
And so we're able to use ROG to not only increase the amount of busted openings we have in giving us access to a lot more mana acceleration, but we're also able to optimize the amount of like early payoffs we have, or early bombs that we have, with giving ourselves all of the polymorph effects.
Cool.
And it winds up leading to a very devastating combo.
Yeah, let me get into that. So like, yeah, I'll get into like what are the, I mean, because cEDH, you have to win, you know, usually pretty quickly, or at least like be gaining some,
in the game state,
gaining some type of advantage over time. That's just like pulling you ahead and ahead every turn without like setting or being able to not get set behind too easily.
Yeah.
And so yeah, with this deck, you're saying the win cons not only are like these like planeswalkers over here and like other stuff. You actually have a polymorph combo in this deck that kind of locks people out, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
One of the real things about this deck, and why I like almost recommend it over other Stax decks, is that not only does it like slow down the game, but it really locks out your opponent's abilities to do anything. You get to this point where you've played your Stax pieces, you've played your Chalice, your Karn, your whatever, and you just throw a wrench in the freaking game plan of everything by putting Sire and Void Winnower into play.
Right.
You slow down the game with these early Stax pieces, and then you throw down these polymorph targets that are just like nigh unbeatable. It really gets to the point where your opponents all have to work together, and your opponents are not playing the game, the game that they want to play. They're all basically now playing your game.
Right.
One of the things that's really fun about this deck is almost every game that you play with it will wind up revolving around you. I think you can speak for this as well, Garrett, and it's one of the reasons that this deck is actually incredibly fun.
Oh, for sure.
So
But-
yeah, I just want to. So while we're still on the topic of Sire Insanity and Void Winnower, is that the choices of that John kind of putting those into this list is quite, in a way, ingenious. And when you're like looking at kind of what other polymorph decks do in the format, you have Poly Hullbreaker Horror, and then
Right.
other decks will like Poly Razaketh or cheat in Razaketh in some way, and this deck cheats in those things. So
Right.
like kind of what these cards do to make this a very efficient and brutal Stax deck is that you have to consider that like a lot of these mid-range lists, like we'll say Blue Farm and Thrasios and stuff like that will
Blue Farm, you're gonna make some people mad with that one.
yeah,
But go on.
but they'll attempt to combat these turn 1 Trinispheres and these turn 1 Karns and these turn 1 like just awful plays for their initial game plan
Right.
with like card advantage, right?
Right.
And these cards are essentially either Void Winnower being half your cards in your hand are useless, or Sire of Insanity being like you cannot generate any card advantage against you. It's just that is what separates this deck away from other Stax decks, is that you
Right.
can have like this green-white pile of like collector oofs and rule of laws where you're just like kind of sitting there and it all kind of
Giving
falls
your opponents
apart.
all the time in the world.
Exactly.
Mhm.
But this
And
deck, yeah, go on.
Yeah, you don't ever let your opponents get to that step.
Yeah,
You don't
that's
ever
where
let
the
them get-
turbo comes in, because it's you keep
Exactly.
applying the pressure. I want to go in onto the. I want to talk a little bit more on the divergent transformations, transmogrify, and stuff like that. So basically, the way this works for people not aware, when the polymorph effects, you basically exile 2 creatures, which will probably be either
Creature.
Rog or
Or your
Tevesh's
tokens.
Thrall tokens. You can exile a creature as well, but for this one, this is probably the best polymorph effect in the deck, considering its instant speed as well. And so you'll start revealing cards from the top until you reveal a creature card, and then just throw it onto the battlefield. And so what happens is you'll get, if you just do one, you can get one of these 2, but if you do both, you get both of them at the same time. And so once these come out, this one is pretty backbreaking for your opponents in terms of like them trying to get out of your Stax pieces. This usually will lock the game up,
And almost
yeah.
all a vast majority of the win cons in cEDH right
yeah,
now
they
are
can't
on
Oracle
2,
or anything.
right?
Yeah, Breach, Oracle. That's off the top of my head. Almost every win con is on 2.
Yeah, a lot of the
Dockside.
decks. Yeah, a
Dockside.
lot of the decks that have a lot of, how do I put it? A lot of people who have tried like this polymorph into Sirens of Insanity shell
Right.
have been like doing this for a while, and one of the things that does make this deck different is instead of just playing Sire of Insanity
Right.
or playing like Sire Turgid, playing Void Winnower gives us not only like a huge clock and being an 11/9, but
Yeah.
a majority of the outs that people can have once you have a Sire of Insanity in play involve like demonic tutoring for like a removal spell, or top decking a breach or finding something to get their breach and then playing the
Cyclonic
cards from their
Rift.
graveyard. Cyclonic Rift, and there is so many outs that Void Winnower denies, in addition to giving you, when you put both of them on the battlefield, 17 power in play, which is going to win the game in roughly 6 turns.
Right, yeah. So another thing that, if you don't know, Sire does at the beginning of each end step, so that includes every single end step that happens. So that means some people think that it's just your turn that'll happen, and then everyone else will get to keep theirs, and then it just happens on your turn. This actually happens every end step for everyone. So basically, everyone is just drawing 1 card a turn and then just discarding it once this comes out.
Fuck your Rhystic Study, fuck your Mystic Remora.
Pretty much. But yeah, so just to clarify on those two things, because some people might not know those interactions, but that is how that works. And then I kind of want to go into, so those are the two, that's like the, I guess, main polymorph game plan.
I wanted to make a little quick note on the polymorph effects.
Yeah.
And another reason why we're running 2 targets is actually all of the polymorph effects in red, other than one that we don't play, that's not very good. Shifting Shadow, I won't talk about that. But all the polymorph effects in red actually wind up getting 2 creatures at some point. We have Luca, which can downtick twice. And being a planeswalker, it dodges like miscast effects and whatnot. And then there is the Reality Scramble, which we can cast with Retrace from our graveyard, and makes and the fact that 3 of these effects all wind up getting 2 polymorph effects can be very powerful. And it also, in games where we like lose one target to whatever effect, we can just get another one, have it be backbreaking.
Right. You always have, like, it's not like
the
a one and done type thing.
Running 2 effects is actually something to be noted.
It's I've seen it, and it works out pretty well. It's like getting either one, even if you're just polymorphing for one, is fine. But then when you have both on the battlefield, it's almost impossible to win from that point.
Yeah.
Or for other people to win.
Yeah.
Which is the point of the deck. You're gonna be winning that game. And then so that's actually not the only win cons. The main reason we chose the deck to have Tevesh is he is a win con in itself. When you're locking the game state out, Tevesh, if you guys can see here, his ultimate, you gain control of all commanders, and that actually includes your commanders as well itself. And so it will bring him out.
If you're at exactly 10 loyalty, it'll kill itself and then bring itself to activate again directly on the battlefield.
There's almost no state where I activate Tevesh at like 11 or 12.
Right.
Tevesh is definitely a centerpiece of our game plan. And one of the reasons why this deck is so good, because we always consistently have a payoff in the command zone. And the amount of card advantage it generates with our ROG means that we're just always going to find our Stax pieces and whatnot to slow our opponents down.
And something to be noted is that the +1 on Tevesh, while sacking a Thrall, draws you 2 cards, which is very good. Essentially a +1 Skull Clamp kind of effect, right? Sacking Rograk, your 0 mana commander, that is pure fodder in this deck, and once you have Tevesh out, you can obviously poly the Thralls.
Right.
Sacking Rog after casting your commander, not only are you in a lot of these games where you're able to turn 1 Tevesh, which is roughly 70% of the games, roughly.
We've done a lot of gold fishing, and roughly, if you're willing to mold a 2 to get just specifically the Tevesh, you can get the turn 1 Tevesh on about 70% of games.
Yeah, so
that's pretty good.
Even cracking Lion's Eye Diamond and playing an Ancient Tomb on turn 1, casting Tevesh and casting Rograk, you actually draw 3 cards.
Yep.
5 mana, draw 3 cards, turn 1, and you have a Planeswalker on 5 on the field.
And on the next turn, because you have Ancient Tomb, you cast Rog, and you're actually at 6 cards on turn 2, even though you mold again to 2 cards in hand.
You're at 7.
That is pretty noteworthy that this deck, for being a Stax deck, actually has really, really good card draw.
It has incredible card draw. Tevesh is a monster of an engine.
Yeah,
it's definitely a centerpiece of the deck.
So I was gonna go into the win cons besides polymorph, and so this is kind of where the idea of the deck came from. We really love this card.
Do it.
Obliterate's by far one of the coolest spells ever printed. And we wanted to build a deck around this. I tried throwing in like random decks when John mentioned it to me, but it had like not worked very well in like other versions and other decks. And so we finally found a deck that it works amazing in, and this is another secondary win con where you can just, you have Tevesh out, and Obliterate will destroy everything except enchantments and planeswalkers, and you also have other planeswalkers in the deck. Chandra, both Chandras,
Chandra.
Karn, Liliana Dreadhorde General, which is hilarious that it actually works so well, but it's like this is kind of like a
I'll
casual
get into
staple.
that.
But
Yeah.
yeah,
Because these are obviously like this is not a competitive deck cards that you see, right?
oh for sure, you don't see these in cEDH at all. These are like
Yeah,
almost unplayable in cEDH most
but
of the time.
the thing about Obliterate is when I first came up with the idea and I just really wanted to play this card, I was playing a Jeska Tevesh deck that was really combating like a certain meta. And I saw the strength and the things that deck did well, and I was like, okay. And it was a similar deck. It was a Jeska Tevesh, basically Stax deck that used Obliterate as like a haymaker to just like make sure nobody has anything, and then ult Tevesh. And when your opponents can't play the game, all you need is a wet paper towel to win the game with, right? The wet paper towel being Tevesh hold, just taking everyone's commanders, hitting everybody with them. But in this deck as well, it's really freaking strong, as it essentially is just an inevitable game plan that you have. Being uncounterable is such a huge game, and it allows you to have so much game into like really weird board states, where people have like a lot of counter magic and there's a ton of stuff going on, and you can just slam Obliterate, have a Tevesh, and like another like Planeswalker or one of your hate enchantments out, and your opponents will just sit there and not be able to do anything a vast majority of the time. One of the best cards that winds up comboing with Obliterate and Tevesh is the old Nether Void.
Good old Nether Void.
And that
notably,
is
notably, the interaction with Obliterate is Nether Void isn't just like Obliterate isn't texted for modern Magic times, and actually says the spell is countered unless its controller pays an additional 3.
Right.
Unlike Static Orb and stuff like that. So your Obliterate resolves without you having to pay an extra 3, and your Chandra resolves without you paying an extra 3, and ultimately like it is the premier stacks piece of this deck.
It is the premier I'm ahead and you are never going to catch up. I have shit out like 6 mana on turn 1, played my commander, and you are never going to catch up as I play this Nether Void now. It is horribly backbreaking.
Yeah, no, this is definitely one of the key things. And Obliterate, again, it doesn't get rid of enchantments. So all of these enchantments that you're playing here are going to stick.
When other people have their own hate enchantments, which you'll run into,
it makes it even worse.
They stay on, and it makes it even worse for opponents to try and play out
silence,
of things.
rule of laws, you really abuse those after that happens.
Oh, 100%.
The stacks pieces are rough for you if they come out on turn 1, but if you can get your commander out, stick your permanent mana, you just kind of like roll with the train. And one of the reasons to play this deck over other decks is that Obliterate just represents an inevitable win con. Things can be really fucked up. You can have like almost no way of winning playing any other deck, right? But you're just you sit there, you have your Tevesh out, and with the amount of permanent mana this deck makes using all of its different effects, which we'll get into later, you will be able to just hard cast that 8-drop into a lot of board states and just clean slate everything.
Yeah, and notably, this deck also does play Mini Obliterate, the 6 mana one. A little bit more of a well-known card, Yokel Hops.
That's played in Legacy a couple.
Only difference is this one, of course, can be countered. The other thing, the reason why this deck is playing both of them is obviously for A, consistency, and B, a lot of times when you have these huge tax effects, your opponents aren't able to interact with you.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. That is one thing that's nice about you'll learn when you play stacks and stuff is, you have like a Thalia out, but in this deck it's like Spear of Resistance or something, and then almost nothing gets countered because it's just the tax
Chalice,
is too much. Yeah. Chalice is out. Stuff like that. Trinosphere is out. Everyone has to pay 3, so it's very easy to resolve a lot of these bigger spells like Chandra's, Karn's, Liliana's, Luca. things like that. And you can get through your own Stax pieces with the amount of like insane ramp that you have. We can kind of
Yeah.
go over the
Do you want
ramp
to get into that
package.
now? Because
Yeah,
we're running
yeah.
a very interesting ramp package.
Yeah, we're doing a pretty interesting ramp package. I mean, we have like a lot of artifacts in the stack, as you can see, 24. Some of them are Stax pieces, so
can
like
hurt.
they're not obviously like 100% all like ramp. There are Stax pieces in here that are good, but you know, Mana Vault, Mana Crypts, LED. Like we said, you can LED Tevesh out and have no hand, cast Rog, draw 3 cards. Next turn, cast Rog again,
Cast
draw
Rog,
3. So you draw 6.
hand.
Yeah, you basically just get a full hand back. And so, and very rarely will people try to like counter a Rog, or not a Rog, to Tevesh turn 1 when you like dump your hand, or
Yeah.
it's not super common because it's not like you're winning the game, you're just
people
ramping.
also aren't like, I don't know, they're not keeping hands based on like having a Force of Will for the Stax deck often, right?
Right.
Unless you are
Unless you
a
grief that hard.
cold-blooded criminal that invokes fear into the hearts of mortals when you play this deck.
Yeah.
This is what happens when you play the
Really
deck at the same
But
store.
it's funny because Tevesh it's an engine, but it's not the problem card actually.
Right.
So it winds up you wind up dodging interaction on your Tevesh often because your opponents want to interact with the other things that you play more.
Yep.
Yeah. I will get into so we have like the big ramp stuff like Grim Mono and stuff like that, but the main thing that like differentiates our ramp package is the keys. Let me go.
Well,
Making
and not
our
to
deck look
mention
more
that
casual.
it's
beautiful.
The ramp package in this deck isn't only artifacts.
No, it's not. We have we have the normal ad nauseum like ramp package that you would see
rituals, right?
that you would see in a Rog deck.
That you'd see in a Rog
like
deck.
Culling Ritual,
like,
Infernal Plunge,
Culling Ritual, Infernal Plunge,
Springleaf
Drum, Mox Amber.
Desperate Ritual. Like it's ridiculous how like hungry for mana this deck is to just you've got such a consistent payout.
Right,
consistent payout that then gives you access to like a bunch of cards, and you want to be consistently playing these like high mana cost cards, because a lot of the times with the game state, you very quickly make the game a 3v1, and you and here's the thing, when you're making the game a 3v1, you just cannot, how do I put it? You can't play all these cards that are like 1-for-1ing people, because it's just, you're just gonna run out, right? You can play all the efficient stuff, and we do play a lot of like efficient cards in this deck, but we also play a lot of like traditionally inefficient cards that really just like don't see play in competitive formats. But when you're putting yourself in the 3v1 position, you need to go over the top, and you need to almost like have these plays that are like win more, and these like 4-for-1s with our board wipes and our hate effects.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about the key package, because I know, so if you watch our Crick Primer, you'll know that John enjoys his keys.
I'm a troglodyte, yeah.
And after playing with them and playing against it, you start to appreciate how well these keys work in decks that are playing Grim Monolith, Mana Crypt, Mana Vault. It just turns
decks that are very well using the colorless mana, right?
Yeah, it turns all of these rocks into a +1 on top of what they already do. Like Mana Crypt will get like 3 mana instead of 2. And then when you have like Monolith out, when you have Thran Dynamo out, when you have all these other stuff, it's a +2. And then you have multiple keys. I've mulled hands where I just have multiple keys, and it's like it starts getting insane. The colorless mana is like insane.
They're also effectively mana neutral or free, like they're just essentially
if you have a Soul Ring
or a Crypt.
Right. They wind up being basically signets that cost 1. Our deck is pretty low on pips, and we're really just like it.
Sometimes you draw Void Winter. I'm not even joking. I think every time I've drawn Void Winter, I've hard casted him.
Yeah.
It's very rare that I actually can't just cast a spell. It's kind of hilarious.
Something I want to bring up is, like, with this deck, because of how strong Tevesh is in the command zone, you can just fucking mull for mana, and
Oh,
that's
yeah.
really the most important thing with the deck is you want hands that produce a ton of mana above all else.
Yeah.
And so cards like Crypt, Soul Ring, Vault, Grim Monolith become even more important to have. And because you're going to wind up like a large majority of the hands that are keepable wind up involving these cards, it means that the keys that you draw into later are going to have an effect. And also, if you have them on turn one, it maximizes your amount of like turn one Teveshes that you can possibly play too. I can't tell you how many games I've had Mana Vault or Grim Monolith plus key to make 4 mana, which is the perfect colorless for Tevesh. It's very, very important.
And can we haven't touched on it yet, but the best that we'll cover on the premier ramp spell of the deck, Jeska's Will.
Oh, that's right. Yeah,
ultimately...
that is. We can cover that right now. Yeah, Jeska's Will is definitely a premier ramp spell in this deck, just because of the absolute butt ton of mana it produces, and it also technically kind of draws you 3 cards. And it just perfectly, like, people will have like 5-6 cards in hand, because also when you're under
Plays
Stax,
turn 1 Trinisphere, and then you're like, okay, cool, now I'll play Jeska's Will. And it's like,
everyone has 7 cards.
This is a ritual that works through Trinisphere.
Yeah, everyone has 7 cards in hand, and you just Jeska's Will, and it's like you get minimum 7 mana, you exile the top 3 cards.
I wouldn't say minimum. It's like you usually get like,
sorry, it's not minimum.
I'd say minimum of like 5 usually.
Yeah, I meant minimum 5. Obviously maximum 7, but you're getting around 5 to 7 mana, which is amazing because it will go straight into your just fat spells that you need to cast. Your Planeswalkers, Obliterate. You don't even need to Obliterate if it's under like a Trinisphere or stuff like that, but it just...
and then it also just like digs for stuff and like makes it so easy to cast your polymorph effects. Like it just...
There's a lot of 5, 6, whatever, 5 and 6, 4, 5, and 6 mana red spells that this card absolutely abuses in this deck. Jeska's Willing into a Chandra, Jeska's Willing into a polymorph effect, etc., is why this card is probably the premier ramp spell of this deck, even though it doesn't even produce black for Tevesh.
Right. I think that's really cool. I see here you're playing Grim Tutor. I kind of like the tutor package here too. They got a little more
Grim Tutor,
consistency.
Grim Tutor is a cuttable card. One of the funny things about this deck is that like you actually almost don't want too many tutors in it, because like the amount of velocity this deck has, having too many tutors can wind up like, how do I put it? It could wind up like
negative.
It can wind up being like negative tempo and making it so you can't play something that turn. And really, a lot of times, it doesn't even have to be like the greatest thing. You just want like a play that sets people back. You know, sometimes you're like, okay, you have this, and it's like, well, you can take a turn to like tutor for the perfect card, but sometimes it's just better to jam like something that actually does something immediately.
Speaking of jamming, I was gonna get into why I guess you would play this over the Turbo Naus version, and how they're similar and how they're, I guess, different.
Yeah. Do you want to go first, Garrett?
Yeah. So I guess with why this deck is like kind of a meta breaker is that a lot of the interaction right now in cEDH is obviously based around instants and sorceries. It's the non-creature spells, it's the instants and sorceries that are ultimately winning decks the game, right?
Carry Naus, yep.
Yeah. So when you're on like this Naus package, and first of all, you're not gonna have the I guess Tevesh is much more abusable in this deck than in like the Ad Nauseam version, right? Where you're abusing his being essentially a planeswalker in this deck.
In the Ad Naus version, he feels more like a side piece. In this version, he feels like the main.
He draws cards in that version, but he's not your win.
Then he like dies,
Yeah, he's gonna die. He'll take
main
some
centerpiece.
Damage. But just I guess the main version of why you're playing this deck and why like it almost seems silly that this deck is like playing a bunch of planeswalkers. The
Mhm.
planeswalkers aren't for Obliterate. Obliterate is for the planeswalkers. The planeswalkers are
Sure.
because the cEDH meta right now can't really interact with you on that axis, right? This on
Right.
the stack interaction that these decks are running is not like going to get to your planeswalkers, right? When you resolve a Chandra Awakened Inferno, it
Mhm.
can board wipe, and then you're sitting there with this planeswalker, with your planeswalkers on the field or whatever, and your opponents can't play creatures to pressure them. Nothing in
Right.
cEDH really is very often bigger than 3 toughness, right? So they're just
Right.
not able to operate on that axis with you, and that's what makes it so potent.
And
It's
you play
because
so many board wipes. Like you got
Yeah,
Blasphemous
and
Axe, you got
because there are like a fair amount of creatures that
Alcoholics
will come
ability.
down and kind of like ruin your plan. We do play a lot of wipes, and it actually feels very good to be on a lot of wipes actually.
Oh yeah.
Because there's so many decks that actually care about like what creatures they're playing. Hell, everybody has a creature in their command zone or two, right? People like are often utilizing commanders for gaining some sort of value, and being able to just like have all these wipes in the deck that not only protect our value engine but annihilate all of our opponents' value engines
Right.
is a strong reason to like play this deck.
Yeah. So I guess the main like difference over like the Turbo Naus deck is you are a turbo deck. It is a turbo deck like at heart, but it's not, it doesn't want to just like try to resolve a Naus and then win the game. And it also doesn't fold as hard, I think, to just getting like one of its pieces stopped. It has a much better grind plan with like Tevesh
Yeah.
as like the centerpiece, and your board wipes and other things that can like
It has
really
a
slow
lot
people down.
more. It has a lot more inevitability, and
Right.
it has a lot more game in being able to jam consistent threats and not rely on one thing specifically.
For sure.
Um,
a
we're
lot of
able
it comes down.
to.
Sorry.
No, you can say what you're
Yeah,
gonna
yeah,
say.
go ahead.
Yeah, just a lot of it comes down to the fact that you are on, obviously your Trinisphere and your Nether Void aren't going to win you the game directly.
Right.
But your deck just has a lot more payouts than these ad nauseum decks, and that's what makes it so inevitable and
Mhm.
in a way resilient to being stopped if you are stopped that quickly.
Yeah.
It's an ad nauseum deck that's playing 12 ad nauseums, right? Like your opponents just aren't going to be able to keep up with that.
Yeah.
Right, right. It also plays, I will say, as a Stax player, it plays extremely well into Stax usually, with the amount of board wipes it has and like other things going on. It doesn't like fold to Stax decks like the other like Nas decks.
Yeah, I will say Rog Tevesh is a deck that is like very much, or excuse me, this build of Rog Tevesh is very much better against Stax decks than other Rog Tevesh decks. Just like one of the main things, something that can happen that feels really bad is when your opponents do play like that turn 1 Draenith or turn 1 Oof before you even catch your turn.
Yeah.
But like if you're going first and you just drop a turn 1 Tevesh and your opponent plays Rule of Law or whatever on turn 1 or even Draenith, which is slowing everybody else down,
It feels
because of
like
like
they
how
could be the
the
game.
because of the velocity of this deck, you're almost always getting your engine online before people wind up like dumping their hate cards. And because of that, um, and like how this deck winds up winning and not needing to actually like get rid of those cards often, you can like use those stacks pieces to help slow the game down for you. And if it's like an oof or something, you can like remove it when you need to, and then make a bunch of mana and like cast a freaking polymorph or
Yeah.
cast a freaking obliterate and just like make everything gone. Obliterate is another, just like one of the reasons to play this deck, because like when you're in those weird board states that are cursed, Obliterate is just inevitable. It's always coming, or in yokel hops, it can be there for like times when you want to play it faster, but Obliterate really just like you can just slam it.
I am always scared of this deck playing against it. every time I play Stax usually, and it doesn't matter how many pieces I have out. If they have around 6 to 8 mana, I don't want Yokel Hops or Obliterate resolving because this will win the game. Like almost at any point in the game, this usually will win the game unless like somehow you've stopped like any of these planeswalkers from coming out or any of these like enchantment hate pieces from coming out. Then it's usually like not too bad, but like it's still always there. And I think I guess with the point of like how this is different from a Turbo Naus deck is the first turn of this deck,
other than like
is
not having a normal win con.
right. Yeah, the first turn of this deck, in my opinion, plays out almost exactly like a Turbo Naus deck. You're basically dumping your hand and then passing like a Rakdos Turbo Naus deck.
Yeah.
You're dumping your hand and then like playing your like commander, but versus like they would dump their hand and play like Adnaz or play like a tutor to get Adnaz, you know. This is kind of a different little axis, but the play style is very, very similar, and especially in the first turn. And you're kind of
first turn of the game,
you're kind of getting ahead really fast, like you're turboing out, and then instead of winning, you're just making everyone's life miserable for the rest of the game, and then just
essentially you get as far ahead as you possibly can on the early turns, and then you make sure nobody can ever catch up.
Right.
And you're like, okay, well, now I'm going to keep drawing these cards with my commander, and I'm going to dump one after the next freaking hate permanence that will just make life will just make life.
Yeah, I don't think we went over this. We'll go over this too. The Planeswalker package. I guess we kind of talked about this. I want to go a little bit more into Liliana, because this is the most beautiful card.
Pretty questionable.
So like this is such a casual this is such a casual staple. Casuals love this card. If you saw this in a cEDH deck, you'd probably just like exit the page and delete it from your browser history.
Yep.
But
I would 99% of the time.
We, and in my opinion, John here and like all the people that have been testing it have realized this card's gas. The creature dying you draw a card, and then also being able to sack 2 creatures down tick just like helps clear the board so well.
Yeah. So
and you can go more into it.
Yeah, one of the things about the planeswalkers in this deck is they are some of our a lot of them are basically used for like one cheaty effect, right? We have Karn and Luca, which are basically there for like, Karn's there because it's one-sided Null Rod that we can like often play on turn 1 or turn 2. And then, Luca just turns into our polymorph effects. Then there's the 6-mana Chandra, which is also kind of like this is just 2 board wipes that are both uncounterable. But the two, definitely the weirdest ones, in my opinion. I mean, I still think Chandra is Awakened Inferno is a weird card, right?
Right.
You don't see that. But Chandra, like Torch of Defiance and Liliana, are definitely some of the most questionable cards, right? You see these and you're automatically thinking like, is this real? But essentially what they allow you to do is they allow you to take a bunch more game actions underneath the Abysmal Stax pieces that you play, and they allow you to like
break
gain
parity.
Value and break parity on the Stax pieces by taking more actions while nobody else can. Liliana does this. It's also often like a very great board wipe, as you can like clear away crappy creatures with your Rolling Earthquakes and other wipe effects, and sometimes you're just like, okay, well, shit, there's a freaking Crom on my opponent's board, there's a Kenrith, and you drop this and just be like, okay, now you have to sack 2 creatures, everybody sacks 2, and you draw 2 when you sack your Thralls, and then every turn thereafter, the uptick winds up being, okay, uptick, make a zombie, then I can uptick Tevesh, draw 3 cards, and so all of a sudden Tevesh is just recall every turn if you have this out, or you can just keep making more chump blockers, which are actually a little bit better than chump blockers and being 2/2s.
Mhm.
And then Chandra
Actually
Torch.
think- I actually think that Liliana Dreadhorde General kind of represents like a lot of in the card itself. It represents a lot of this deck's game plan in one singular card.
Yeah.
Oh, definitely.
It's a repeatable draw engine where essentially you can do things on your board underneath these Trinisphere and Nethervoid effects. Like nobody else is going to be playing the game. You aren't really doing it either, but you're making 2/2s, so you're doing something. You're making 2/2s and you're drawing cards.
Right.
And then with a essentially the down tick is essentially Obliterate, right? Almost.
yeah.
It's a pretty one-sided
The
Obliterate.
ult, right? Yeah.
It's a one-sided
So-
Obliterate, basically.
So it's
Yeah.
almost a one-sided Obliterate. They can keep one thing, right? But ultimately it's pretty bad when that happens. So it kind of represents everything that this deck does well. In that you have this Planeswalker that's drawing cards, killing their creatures, and then ultimately this inevitable like, okay, there's nothing that you guys did to stop this over the 2 to 3 turns that I had it on the field, and
Right.
now the game is over for you guys.
Right.
It has a finisher.
Yeah.
Yeah. The ways this deck does close the games too is like Chandra as well. This is a board wipe,
Chandra upticks.
but I mean, yeah, you cast.
emblems.
Keep in mind,
I will tell you this: there's no sweeter feeling than winning a cEDH pod with Chandra emblems.
oh, for sure.
It is. Oh,
You-
chef's kiss.
So
And
the
you
thing
forgot-
with this deck that like people are like, okay, you don't have any actual true win cons, quote unquote, because like we don't have some weird combo or like thing going on, but it basically is like a non, what is it? What do they call that? Win conless Stax deck in a way, but it still has win cons in the fact that you're gonna eventually kill them. So you need to finish games in a timely manner. We actually do play this deck in timed tournaments, and it does
Yeah.
really well. It doesn't just draw out.
Has been actually doing great at our LGS that has
Very
pretty big
competitive
cEDH
cEDH.
tournaments.
Yeah.
Very competitive place. That has 50-minute time rounds. Believe it or not.
And this deck is able to clear it up there. So yeah.
Every time I've played this deck, I've been in the top 5 of the tournament every single time.
How many weeks has it been? 5 weeks? 6 weeks? Have you gone?
Over, I think like 6 tournaments. I
Six
think.
tournaments.
Yeah, six tournaments. It's been in the top 5 lists 6 times.
Basically
And
top 4.
one
You only
of
got
them
once
as well.
top 5.
Yeah, I got one time where I tied for 4th.
Right.
And
So top 4
They're
making it
roughly
to the
like
final
25
pod almost
per
every
and
time.
that's
tournaments each week.
you can imagine that a lot of times your opponents will fear this deck after bringing
After
it
they
out
know,
for this
yes.
run. I played 3 tournaments in this deck, and what's kind of bad about this deck is it a little bit of a toxic environment is created by this deck
It
where
will invoke
when you
fear.
win, you don't actually win, you just make your opponents lose.
Thank you guys for watching that deck tech. If you guys enjoyed the deck, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. If you want the full deck, it'll be down in the description. And yeah, I hope you guys have fun in your games with it. See ya.